I noticed the rules on my first day, but I didn't read them properly until much later, which is probably the most predictable mistake I could have made. They were taped inside the elevator, printed in plain black text on a sheet of paper that had clearly been replaced many times, judging by the faint rectangles of older tape marks surrounding it like scars. At first glance, I assumed they were the usual building policies: keep noise down, don't block fire exits, dispose of rubbish properly. The kind of rules you skim without thinking. But the elevator was slow, painfully slow, and boredom is dangerous when your eyes start wandering. That's when the first line sank in: if the elevator stops on floor 0, do not get out. I remember frowning at the words as the elevator climbed. Buildings don't have a floor 0. Ground floor, maybe. Basement, sometimes. But floor 0 felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like hearing someone pronounce a familiar word incorrectly. I told myself it was a joke, the kind of dry humor tenants sometimes leave behind for whoever moves in next. The elevator shuddered slightly between floors, and I laughed under my breath at how quickly my imagination had already started running ahead of me. The rules were posted again in the lobby, this time framed behind glass like something official. That detail stuck with me more than the words themselves. Jokes don't get framed. Someone cared enough to preserve the list. I stood there with my moving boxes piled beside me, reading the second rule properly for the first time: do not use the staircase between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. The stairs will be unreliable during these hours. The word unreliable sat heavily in my mind long after I left the lobby. Stairs are many things. Dusty. Narrow. Creaky. But unreliable sounded like the kind of word you use to describe a person. My apartment was on the 6th floor, small but bright, with wide windows that let the afternoon sun spill across the floor in long rectangles of light. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels comforting at first and suspicious later. As I unpacked boxes, the rules replayed in my mind, each sentence returning with sharper clarity than before. It was the third rule that lingered the longest: if you hear knocking from inside your wardrobe, do not open it until morning. I laughed when I first read it. I stopped laughing when I realized I kept thinking about it hours later. For the first week, nothing happened. The building remained peaceful and silent, and I felt increasingly foolish for letting a list of strange instructions take up space in my thoughts. I started to think of the rules as a harmless tradition, an inside joke shared by tenants I had yet to meet. But I noticed something strange during that first week. I barely saw anyone. Occasionally, I'd pass someone in the hallway or elevator, but conversations never lasted more than a few polite sentences. No one mentioned the rules. No one asked if I had read them. By the end of the second week, I had memorized the list without trying. It lived quietly in the background of my thoughts, like a song you don't realize you've learned until you catch yourself humming it. The fourth rule had been printed in smaller text than the others: if you see a child in the hallway after midnight, walk back the way you came. There was no explanation. No justification. Just the instruction, delivered in the same calm tone as the rest. I stopped reading the rules after that. Not intentionally. I simply avoided looking at them, the way you avoid eye contact with someone you don't want to talk to. Life settled into a routine. Work. Home. Sleep. The building stayed quiet. Too quiet. I began to appreciate the silence. At least, I told myself I did. Then one night, the elevator stopped on a floor that wasn't on the panel. The number display didn't change. The doors simply opened onto darkness. Not the kind of darkness you get from unlit hallways, but something deeper, like the light had been swallowed before it could reach the walls. My finger hovered over the open button for a second too long before the memory of Rule 1 snapped back into place. I pressed the close button so quickly my hand shook. After that, the rules stopped feeling strange. They started feeling practical. Necessary. Like instructions left behind by someone who had learned them the hard way. I stopped using the staircase at night without consciously deciding to. Even when the elevator took forever, I waited. The word unreliable echoed in my mind every time I passed the stairwell door. One evening, I noticed a new rule on the notice board in the lobby. The paper looked fresher than the rest. Do not answer the intercom between 2:13 a.m. and 2:16 a.m. Seeing the list change unsettled me more than the rule itself. It meant the situation wasn't static. It was evolving. The quiet of the building began to feel different after that. Less like comfort. More like anticipation. I started noticing how rarely I saw my neighbors. When I did, our conversations felt rehearsed, as if we were all avoiding the same topic without acknowledging it. One night, as I passed the notice board, I realized another rule had appeared without me noticing when it had been added. It read, "If you realize a rule has changed, do not ask the landlord about it." I stood there staring at the glass frame long after I finished reading, feeling the uncomfortable realization settle in that everyone in the building must have noticed the changes at some point. No one had said anything. The final edition wasn't printed. It was written in handwriting. Messy, uneven handwriting that didn't match the neat typed text of the other rules. Beneath the list, squeezed into the corner of the frame, were words that hadn't been there the day before. The rules are written by the tenants who learn them too late. I remember standing there in the silent lobby, staring at those words until the reflection in the glass stopped feeling like my own. Because for the first time since moving in, I realized something that made the entire building feel colder. There was space at the bottom of the frame. Enough space for more rules to be added. And suddenly, I understood why no one talked about them.